Okay guys, I asked, you answered, and I guess everybody's in for me showing you how to make bread. I don't know if it's more you don't think I can do it or you just want to know how to do it. So we'll find out in the comments when this video is released. This one's going to be a little different. It's not a live. There's just way too much time between all the processes. So what we're going to end up doing, this is going to be a production one, but I will be, once it goes live on Facebook, I'll be in the comment section with you. So if you have any questions throughout the video, just let me know and we'll go from there. All right, we're going to head down to the ingredients now and go over everything. There's not a whole lot to this, and we'll start the process. Okay, so like I said, guys, there's not a whole lot to this. We're just going to go over the ingredients quick. I am going to have a cost analysis sheet for you so you know what you're going to be in your bread. And I'll leave that surprise for the end and we can go from there. But for this recipe, you're going to need 6 cups of bread flour. That's right here. We're going to need 1 tablespoon of salt, 2 tablespoons of sugar, 2 tablespoons of active dry yeast, 2 tablespoons of butter. Now I softened this in the microwave. You can leave yours out, let it soften on its own. 1 cup of milk and 2 cups of lukewarm water. So to get started, we're going to get some of this stuff out of the way. And what we need first is going to be the 2 cups of lukewarm water, the 2 tablespoons of salt, and dump that in. Make sure you get it all out of there. And go ahead and mix that first. Kind of get that sugar to dissolve. Make sure that you're not beating the crap out of your yeast when you put it in. You don't want to overmix your yeast because you will kill it. And I think that's some of the problem that some people are having out there. I've talked to them, and they said their bread kind of turns a grayish color or a grayish brown color. A lot of that has to do with you're killing your yeast. So now a little bit of sugar on the bottom is not a big deal. It's going to sit for roughly about 10 minutes and let that yeast kind of proof and come to life. So now we're going to go ahead and put the yeast in. And you want to kind of put this in slowly, otherwise it'll clump up on you. Just kind of take your time with it. Okay. Now, when you mix this in, you want to mix very slow. Just kind of slightly stir it in. It doesn't have to be beat in. Just kind of see right there where it started to break on the top and start to sink. That's what you want. So you're not excessively beating the crap out of this to try to get it blended up. You don't want that. It'll start doing its thing on its own. Not too much longer here. You can already see it's kind of turning a hazy color to the water. A lot of that's that yeast already activating. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to leave this sit for up to 10 minutes. Now you want to keep an eye on it because it is going to double quite a bit in size. That's why you use a larger bowl than what you're needing. Don't just try to cram it into the 2 cups of water that you got in here. So we're going to leave this for 10 minutes. When we come back, we'll show you how to start the whole process. I don't know if you can see this very well on the camera, but you can see it's quite a bit thicker right now. It's gained about a cup of froth out of that 3 cups. And in the mixer, I already put 4 cups of bread flour. So you want to start with 4 cups and then go ahead and add your wet ingredients. So we're going to bring the mixer up, get it started. Now this is really noisy. If it gets to be too bad, what I'll do is just voice over it and take the noise out of it if it's too annoying. So. Always keep paper towels handy. clean up as you go. You don't have to clean up so much later. Now we're going to go ahead and add our cup of milk in. Put our 1 tablespoon of salt in here. And we're going to go ahead and put the 2 tablespoons of butter in. You can use margarine on this to save you some money. I still like using just regular, good old-fashioned real butter. So now is when it might get a little loud or a little annoying. We're going to bring the speed up a little bit on this, and we're not going to put any more flour in until this completely incorporates. Now when I say bring the speed up, you don't want to bring the speed up too far because you still have a live yeast in this. So you can still end up killing your yeast off if you start hitting it a little too hard with the beater in here. Now, some mixers, and you guys can do this, in the bowl by hand if you want. I just can't right now with the way my shoulder is. But when some of these mixers start, you'll see this ridge starting to form of dry flour. Just go ahead and take your spoon. You probably should shut the mixer off to do this. Every once in a while I do pay for it and it gets caught. But if you play your cards right and kind of watch it as it's going around, you can be a little safe about it. But if not, go ahead and shut the mixer off and go ahead and peel your flour off the side. Let it keep mixing. So now you'll notice in there that it's starting to get a very, very liquidy dough. That's when your flour is all starting to incorporate. Now what you want to do, you don't want to go ahead and grab your flour here and just start dumping in. You want to add a little bit at a time. It calls for 6 cups, but it may not take all 6 cups. It might take a little more. It's going to depend on what it looks like as we get there. So we're just going to go ahead and add a little bit in. Just enough to basically get the beater covering the top. You can see it's starting to get wet again up on the top there. And you can go ahead and leave your speed up on this for a little while until the dough starts to get a little thick, and then you want to start slowing everything down. You got to think of hand kneading bread. It's a lot slower process than what this mixer is going to do. So just got to watch your speed. You don't have to be too concerned about, you can still see the chunk of butter floating around in there. As the dough starts to form, it'll break that butter up and move it throughout the dough. All right, so most of that dry flour is gone. We're going to go ahead and put a little more in. Now you notice I haven't even put a whole cup in yet. That's how slow you need to be adding it. So this part of the video is going to be a little bit like watching paint dry. This is probably the lengthiest part of the whole thing. All right, we're starting to get a wet top again, so we're going to take a little more flour.
I'm going to start adding back in again. So I'm doing maybe a third of a cup at a time. Now, one thing you'll notice with different flour varieties, like this one, this is the Dakota flour from Sam's Club. We buy it in bulk in 25-pound bags. This one I noticed it as it's coming together, it gets a lot stringier than some of my other flours. Just don't be too concerned about it. It all works out fine. All right, so we're starting to get that nice wet top again. So we're going to take a little more flour. Go ahead and add it in slow. And you'll notice every time that dough gets just a little thicker, and that's kind of what we're looking for. We're wanting that to, as we keep adding, it's going to come together as a ball. And that's when the actual kneading process starts. This is just basically mixing. So keep in mind, you're still going to need to, once you get that ball to start to form, you're still going to need to run this mixer for a while. Getting a pretty consistent wet top again, so we're going to add in a little more flour. Pretty quick here, it should start pulling into a ball. I don't know if you can tell, but if you can see right over here, you can see that dry line of flour showing up. We're going to want to address that here pretty quick. So we'll let this mix a little longer. If it doesn't start pulling it in, we'll go ahead and help it along a little bit. In fact, we're going to shut this off and help it out. So you guys notice there's this little ball that stays formed in the center there. And that's where your bread dough is starting to come together. So we're just going to knock the edges in a little bit. Clean the beater off. Get everything kind of ready to go again. Now, don't do this part. I do it, but don't do it. I use the beater to wipe my spatula off. All right. Now you can see that dry ingredients are starting to pull out from the side of the bowl, go down to the center of the bread ball. And we're just going to keep adding some flour in. Now we're going to want to kind of do it all the way around at the slower speed. You just want to add a little at a time. And then let it do its thing for a little bit. See, as you can see, it's starting to pull away from this side pretty good. We still got a wet spot right over here. So what we're going to do is take a little more flour. We're going to get that right there. And you'll see as that starts to mix in, it'll break those strands and start to pull the ball to the center. Now, for the sake of time, I don't recommend you guys do this, but I'm going to speed the mixer back up again. The reason I don't like to run it at the higher speeds, it is harder on your mixer. You should never mix bread dough over speed 2. I don't know if you can tell or not in the camera, but we're starting to get a nice bread ball starting to form. It's still got a ways to go, though. It's going to take a little while for this to all come together for you. And again, I'm going to do what I tell you not to do. I'm going to reach in and just kind of try to help it along a little bit. Knock the dry stuff off the sides. Let it start forming into the ball a little easier. We still have a fair amount of flour left here, so I'm going to knock this down, take another good scoop. I can see it's getting a little too wet over on this side. It's starting to stick, so I'm just going to put a little more flour in. And just as you see those wet spots starting to stick too hard, you go ahead and put a little flour in that spot. You'll see it pull away right away, so it can keep forming the ball. I'm going to go ahead and keep mixing this together, and once it starts to come into a good bread ball, I will come back and just show you how it's working for kneading. So give me a little bit, and I'll be back with you. All right, guys, so I don't know if you noticed or not, or if you can see it in the camera, but You can see now how it's starting to pull away from the side, so what we're going to do is turn it down and let it knead for a little bit. I'm just going to go down to stir and let that really work that bread dough. You can see it's kind of looking stringy in there. What that is you're actually stretching those gluten fibers and you're starting to get that chewiness that everybody likes in their bread. So you're going to let this knead for a fair amount of time. You don't want to go too long because you'll have a bread that, that'd be a little much. But so the other thing we're going to do is the same bowl that we had the flour in. We're going to go ahead and line that with a little bit of Crisco. And it doesn't take much. That's why I'm not including it in the price. So we're going to go ahead and grab a paper towel. And while that's stirring away, we're going to come in here and grab a little bit of Crisco on the paper towel, unless you don't mind it on your fingers. And we're going to line the entire bowl. This bread dough will fill this bowl when it gets done rising. So we want to make sure we don't have any sticky spots. And make sure to line this whole thing. I don't know if you can tell in the, you can see that in the video, but a little bit shinier all of a sudden. I'm going to go ahead and just keep working this down. And it is just about done. Now what you can do is you can always stop this. Go ahead and drop your bowl or lift your head depending on what kind of mixer you have. And just check to see how sticky it is. If it's a little too sticky, we're going to add a little flour. Now you see it's kind of sticking to my fingers there. So we're going to get a little bit more flour and put it in there and just go from there. All right. Now you don't want to add this until you get it back up and get this started. So go ahead and bring your bread ball back up. You want to turn it on stir. Now we're not going to use nearly this much flour. That's probably going to be about enough. So now we're just going to let that incorporate in. Let it stir around for a little bit. Now you can see it's definitely pulling away from the sides. You have a bread ball forming. And once that forms, you really don't have to run it too long after that. So I notice there's still a little stickiness over here, so we're just going to put a little bit in. Still right on this side here. Now you can see I haven't used much of that flour, but it's just enough to get that bread ball to start pulling away. So keep in mind when you're making this bread, the measurements are there, but it's not an end-all be-all. You might add a little more water, you might add a little more flour. Just depends on what your dough feels like doing that day. Now you guys can see that's starting to really form a nice ball in there. It's really starting to pull away from the edges. You're getting that stringy look to it. The gluten's doing its job, starting to break down. You're starting to stretch it. Everything's looking good. Still a little sticky, it looks like, but it's pulling some dry flour up off the bottom. So we're just going to let it work for a little longer and see what it does here. Just, you probably can't really see it, but this edge right here is still sticking. Oh, I did want to talk about these stainless steel bowls. I'll tell you what, I bought these at Sam's Club. They're in the restaurant equipment section. And I thought, we'll give them a try. These have been the best bowls. And if you buy them correctly, they're actually stackable. They'll line into each other. They're great for doing any baked goods. They're great for handling dry goods. If you make Chex Mix, any of that kind of stuff, works wonderful. And they're cheap. So you can tell by looking at it that gluten's starting to break again. We're starting to get some sticky spots along the edges. I'm going to go ahead and scrape the bottom, try to pull some of that up. If not, we'll go ahead and put a little more flour in there. Looks like it could use just a titch more. Just a little flour. For time's sake, I'm going to go ahead and bring the speed up on it just a little bit. I don't recommend you guys do that unless you have a pretty heavy-duty mixer. So. You can hear how hard that mixer is having to work to get that dough ball around. Now we got a dough ball forming. And like I said, guys, this is the longest part of the whole thing. So as you're working that dough around, remember it's stretching those fibers in there of the gluten. And this is going to be this one will probably be a pretty crusty, pretty chewy bread when we get done. Wet breads are usually a little softer, a little more moist. Like a drier mix like this where it's a stretch, it's going to be more like a French bread type. All right, we're gonna check that, see how sticky it is. Yeah, that's not too bad. It's coming off the hook pretty good. So now I'm gonna take a little Crisco, not much, rub it in my hands, get a nice oil layer on there. Unfortunately, I already have a little dough on. We're gonna go ahead and take the dough hook out. Take this completely out of there. Hold it up, and once you get this rolling, you gotta go quick because it is a stickier dough. And don't worry, you'll have plenty. All right, so once we got that in there, we're just gonna kind of roll it around. You have to coat a little flour in there. This one's, for some reason, this batch turned out a little bit wetter than I was hoping. That's why it's sticking so bad in the pan. But I'm just gonna turn this in there. Coat my hands again a little bit. Coat the flour in there a little bit. There we go. Starting to be able to pick it up now without it causing too much trouble. So now I'm just going to kind of roll this into itself. You can see as I'm pushing the bottom up to the top, just making a nice little ball. Put that back in there. Now you're going to cover this with a warm cloth, warm wet cloth, and it's going to rise. And it might take, it can take up to an hour, depending on how warm your house is. So we're going to go ahead and get that covered. You can see it's kind of funny, it's got a little bubble forming right there already from the yeast doing its job. So we're going to get that covered up, let that double in size. When we come back, we'll show it punching down and moving it into the bread pan. So bear with me, and we'll be back shortly. Okay guys, it's big reveal time. Notice something weird looking about that bowl? It's kind of poofy. It has plumb filled up with our bread dough. Look at that, a couple little taps and poof, there she goes. Just want to make sure we, sometimes the towel leaves little fuzzies on it. Let's see if we can get any of these other ones to go. Oh yeah, there it comes. Look at that. So when they say punch it down, they literally mean punch it down. Get the dough kind of back to a controllable size here. And what we're going to do is get our bread pans ready. Now, this recipe does make 2 loaves. I don't know if I told you that in the beginning. So if you wanted to, you can cut this recipe in half. You might want to wait and see how quick you eat the first loaf, just to let you know. It doesn't appear to take us too long. So what I do is I take this, pull the bread dough up in half, or best guess of half anyway. Doesn't have to be super accurate. Boy, that is some sticky stuff. Alright. So now, let me get a little flour on my hands here. You want to take and kind of roll this to where it starts to look like those bread loaves that you could buy in the store that are pre-froze, and twice as expensive as what we're making right here. And then just go ahead and set it in the pan. Get your hands a little floured up for the next one. Same thing. I'm going to turn this around a little bit, get it stretched out, get it ready to go. I'm just going to set that right in this pan right here. Now, if your OCD kicks in and you have to have them exact, I am not the guy to show you how to do that. I cannot make these match to save my life, it seems. Alright, so that bread dough rised for about, it was about 40 minutes. Now, we're going to cover these back up in the pans and let them continue to rise. So, we're going to take our same damp cloth. You want to use a damp cloth just to make sure your top of your bread doesn't dry out, doesn't crust up too soon. And we're going to let these rise again once they fill that pan a little bit, which is about 40 minutes. We'll come back and get them in the oven. Now's the time you want to go preheat your oven to 400 degrees. So go ahead. Alright guys, we're getting really close here. For all of you that stuck with me so far, thank you. Let's see, there's my... Okay, so you got a couple options here to do. You can leave the bread the way it's sitting, which is fine. I do that about 99.9% of the time. Or we can take a razor knife. Now this one I have cleaned in the past, and the only thing I use it for is this. Now what you can do, tell you what we'll do. We'll do one with the razor cut and one we'll just leave plain. So this one here, we're gonna slice it right down the center here. And just pull. We're gonna get right to there. Come back and open it up this way. Pull. Okay. And we are going to throw these in the oven. The oven's already preheated. And it's going to be somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes. And we'll be back on the table on the cooling rack and you will see your finished product. Okay folks, it was about right at 20 minutes in the oven. Are we ready to see what they look like? Ooh, they're still hot. And hey, who knew we can make bread? You can tell this one's the one with the split top. It kind of gives it a little more artsy-fartsy look to it. Right now, they're a kind of crunchy crust on them, but I'll let you know as time goes on you're going to lose that. The humidity starts to come out of the bread a little bit, softens the crust up. So once these cool down a little bit, our last one will be a taste test. I'll probably do that on the live video just to let you guys know that the bread video is done and loading, and we'll go from there.